Good morning, Keith. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. You're in Vancouver and you were on the panel on tourism and racism. You were a big hit on that. It's a very successful panel at WTM this year. But when I listened to you talking, I really wanted to start a conversation with you about indigenous tourism, because I've been aware of this as an issue for a while, and I'd quite like to discuss some of it with you. But first, before we get into that, Keith, can you just say something about yourself?
Well, thanks for following up. It was an honor to be at the WTM recent panel. My name's Keith Henry. I'm the president and CEO of the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. I'm a Métis person, one of the Indigenous communities here in this country, and coming to you here out of Vancouver, British Columbia, so a little ways away from your part of the world, but happy to follow up. And I'm glad to see that people want to continue the conversation, because that's really how we make change.
Keith, I think you told me in a previous conversation there's something like 700 different ethnic groups in Canada. Do you want to just tell us something about that?
Yeah, the Indigenous population, in Canada, it's not homogenized. I know a lot of people may or may not realize that in that part of the globe, but we have three main Indigenous populations. It's about 2 million people of our country here in Canada. They're from every part of the country. There's about 630 First Nations. There's a number of Inuit communities. So there's First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And the Inuit are more northern Canada. First Nations are spread throughout the country, and Métis were sort of the children of the fur trade, the first mixing of Europeans and Indigenous people in the 1700s across our country. So that Métis population is largely urban focused, and there's a number of smaller Métis settlements in the country as well. So very diverse population, not homogenous whatsoever. Different languages, different cultural practices, different iconic sort of cultural, regalia and things like that.
Keith, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be watching this interview are going to be intrigued by the Victorian gentleman who's there over your right shoulder. You tell us something about him.
Yeah, well, I'm a Métis person from Saskatchewan, the middle part of the country, and that's a picture of Louis Riel. He's one of our most iconic historic leaders that stood up for Métis rights in 1869-70 and 1880, and again in 1885. He ultimately gave his life fighting for our people, and that's a picture of him, obviously, sometime in about the 1884. I think that picture was from that I understand. So, but yeah, it's just I'm as a Métis person, I'm just honor who I am, and I try and pay respect to the people that led the development of our people in this country.
Keith, I've actually been to Canada on holiday. Well, not actually, I wasn't on holiday. I came to speak at a conference, as ever seems to be the case. But to my shame, I don't think I didn't consciously meet any of those groups at all. How difficult is it for a tourist to actually meet with people from these 700 different ethnic groups?
Well, I think it's been difficult in the past because as an industry, we hadn't really organized very well in terms of the businesses and the kind of experiences people could have. But, over the last, I don't know when your visit was, but over the last,
about 10 years ago, Keith, about 10 years.
Over the last 10 years, there's been significant progress. So today we have about 1,700 businesses from a variety of different Indigenous communities. Some are hotels, some are outdoor adventure, some are guided walking tours, some are on the land, kayaking tours on the water. Like, there's really quite a diversity now of cultural experiences in the country that just wasn't there, 10 years ago. So what I find is we've really evolved as an industry. The communities have embraced it more and more, and we're just seeing there's just a lot more to share with the world. So I understand why you may not have seen that. And so that's one issue. The other side of this conversation is that as a country, we haven't done a really effective job marketing and promoting awareness to, with the mainstream tourism sector. So we continue to work with partners like Destination Canada and all the different layers of marketing organizations to make sure that they understand how we need to we think that the most appropriate way to market and promote Indigenous tourism.
One of the things that you said earlier is that this shared experience of being Indigenous has not been homogenized in Canada. And I know it hasn't south of your border as well in the USA, but it does seem to me to be quite difficult to keep that identity going in the context of Disneyfication and the tendency to homogenize these groups rather than to see the differences. Is that a problem in Canada, this homogenization trend?
Well, it certainly has been a problem, and we've seen it. And well, two things. One, communities themselves don't want to be Disneyfied. They really want to share their cultural authentically, and that's a very powerful word for us. The original sort of presence of language, regalia, cultural traditions and practices, things that they've agreed to share with the world. So that's really so important. It's taken us a number of years to get social license, if I can call it that, with indigenous communities to really want to support and work with tourism. So that's been a big ongoing challenge for us. And the other side of it too is we have a lot of younger generation that they it's almost like they're being lured out of a lot of community practices and culture because it's convenient. It's not promoted as mainstream. So what tourism has become such an agent of just sustaining our culture in so many ways. I'm not saying it's the most perfect tool in the toolbox, but in Canada, I really find that we've turned a corner, and I find that it's been our cultural tourism that's really helping people be proud of who they are in a diverse set of ways, and that they can actually make a living at it, and they can share it in a I guess a really authentic way.
I haven't worked with indigenous groups in America at all, perhaps to my shame. I wish I'd had the experience. But I have done work in Eastern Europe when that was emerging from behind the Iron Curtain. And we would be working up in the mountains in Slovenia, say, in a forested area. And time again, as we would leave a workshop, one of the old ladies would say, "Thank you, thank you." And it took me a little while to work out why. And it was because they had a sense that if tourism came, their young people wouldn't leave the village. It was that sense that there would be value, two kinds of value. One, economic value would come with the tourism, but also cultural value, that the respect the tourists showed for the way of life of the villagers would make young people in those villages less likely to want to run away. Still a pressure, but in some way it helps to alleviate it. Do you recognize that?
100%. We have many communities that are still geographically intact, and and there's always been a desire, or there's been almost this, not desire, but there's almost been this impression that they're going to have to leave for opportunity. And what indigenous tourism is doing is actually bringing opportunity to them now.
Yes.
And it's a total reversal of what was almost, it seemed like you have to go away for university, you have to go away for trade school, you have to become maybe in the energy sector or the forestry sector or another area where you're not really realizing the actual economic strength of your culture and your community. And so we're seeing a complete reversal of that in a lot of parts of the country. I'm not saying it's everywhere. We still have communities that are struggling with balancing those things. But I absolutely agree. We see that, and there's a number of communities in Canada where you go visit and you can just feel that sense of cultural strength and pride, and they don't have to leave their community, and their sustainable jobs, and they're really sharing who they are, their most powerful tool for the entire community. So I see things changing, and I see it rapidly changing.
Keith, one of the things that I think I understand about ethnic cultural traditions and craft is often there's a reluctance to adapt the craft form to make something which has utility value for the tourist. Is that a big issue amongst the groups in Canada, or do they see an economic value in accepting that there needs to be some perhaps reworking of the form of the craft, if not its cultural integrity, so as to find a market?
That is actually one of our biggest issues facing, a lot of the indigenous artists in this country. I mean, what Canada's been flooded with is a lot of our traditional sort of prints and designs and carvings, and a lot of the stuff has now fallen to like the wholesale market, made in China, made in India, made anywhere but by them, and there's no real fair trade. And so we've estimated over the last few years that it's worth $7 to $8 billion a year in sales at gift shops. It's a massive amount of economic potential. So what what I would say collectively is a lot of artists have been very, and communities very frustrated with our culture being appropriated, very frustrated with the fact that this happens. There's consumer laws that may or may not be able to be changed very easily. So what we've been saying is that, look, let's just make sure as an industry, let's promote authentic indigenous, art and authentic indigenous purchasing. And so I find been a big rallying cry for that. And I think it's been very effective. So I would say that people want to see it done right. And there needs to be the sense of fair trade. Yes, maybe some things will have to be mass produced, but there needs to be an indigenous beneficiary at the end of that economic food chain, if I can say it that way. So I find that people are adjusting to the realities of that, but we have a long ways to go, and we're trying to. In all honesty, it's a big issue for us. It's actually, when you think of the size of that value, it's massive to continue to adjust.
You won't be surprised to know, Keith, that it's a big issue in large parts of Africa too. I mean, the way in which a manufacturing business in Kenya can sell into street tourism in South Africa. And of course, the tourist is robbed then of the authenticity as well. It's not just that your communities are being robbed, the tourist is being robbed. And it seems to me one of the big advantages that you have now is this massive growth in the desire for experiential tourism. I assume that's part of what's made the difference in Canada, this different motivation for the travelers.
It has, like, we've seen so much growth, so much demand for authentic experiences, both domestically and internationally. And I think it's been that consumer demand for something different. A lot of people we see coming to Canada, whether they're whatever part of the world or within Canada, they've been to a lot of the larger cultural our larger tourism destinations. They're looking something unique, new. They go and they experience, and they sometimes stumble upon indigenous experiences, and they find it life changing. I mean, the kind of feedback we get from consumers is they find it life changing. It's a very emotional experience for a lot of people. And whether it's going and spending time in a remote location or experiencing something locally, I'm in Vancouver, there's some authentic indigenous cuisine here, or the Takaya Tours does, they do a canoe tour just in North Vancouver. They're just realizing there was a whole layer of experiences they didn't know was there before. And so demand is driving it. And we were on record growth year over year. We were outpacing all of the tourism growth in this country by quite a bit in the last 3 years. So it's caused a massive change in behavior, and partners are seeing how important it is.
And of course, I mean, I'm not the least bit surprised by that, Keith. I think that's been a worldwide trend, really. But one of the things you can offer in Canada is a degree of immersion, isn't it? That you can actually go and be part of that community for a short period of time, almost a temporary resident. So you can have that immersed, authentic experience. But in terms of what's happening in Vancouver with the food, does that mean the food is changing very quickly, or is it still authentic?
It's authentic. I think that what we're finding is our indigenous chefs and our indigenous restaurants, there's not a large amount of those businesses across the country, but here, there's Salmon and Bannock. There's a company called Mr. Bannock. They provide an indigenous culinary experience, and they provide it in a variety of ways. Whether it's seafood or on the land food, they provide an indigenous cultural flavoring to it. And Salmon and Bannock is a small boutique bistro restaurant, and I know it's COVID these days and things aren't quite what they were, but if you looked on TripAdvisor, or anyone could, for Vancouver for restaurants, Salmon and Bannock, of 2,000 restaurants or so, is one of always, typically it's been number one a few times. It's like, I mean, the consumer demand is there and there's no denying it. And so there's a reason we're trying to always use that to showcase mentoring with other up and coming indigenous chefs or our community. Say it is possible. The realm of fiction is gone. This is possible. And we're seeing it in places like Vancouver, which is one of our most cosmopolitan cities in the country.
Keith, we've been looking at the positive side. I'd be surprised if you're not still struggling to convince some parts of the tourism industry to take the kind of products that we're talking about seriously. So I'd like you, just as we come to the end of this interview, to imagine that I'm a tour operator and I'm saying to you, look, I can get it cheaper if I go to this coach company or whatever. What would you say to me?
Well, I would have a very straightforward line, and I would say, if it's not about us, if it's without us. And the fact is, we demand that it's authentic, and we demand, and we'll make sure that we take care of that. So we've seen a lot of fake Indigenous perceived efforts over the years. It failed for decades in Canada. We are standing on our own 2 feet. And if you're going to work with Indigenous tourism, it's got to work with us directly, not around us, not beside us, not going and doing whatever you think needs to be done your way. The business culture is changing, and those that do it right are very successful. Those that don't go through a lot of pain and they give up.
Keith, just give us that line again. I think it's a great catch line for this program of talks, which I'm going to be doing.
It's not about us without us. And we live by that here in Canada.
Keith, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate your time.